Get this doll off my base. Maddox's voice cut across the tarmac like a blade. He didn't whisper it. He didn't say it privately. He said it loud enough for every operator on that runway to hear. Then he turned and walked away before she could respond. Cruz stepped forward and kicked her rifle case sideways across the ground. Dolls don't belong in combat zones. Go home, little girl. The laughter was immediate, brutal, designed to break her. She picked up the case, said nothing. 48 hours later, 9 enemy fighters were dead at 3,000 meters, and every man who laughed owed her his life. If you've ever been dismissed before you even opened your mouth, drop your city in the comments right now. And if this story moves you, subscribe, because by the end of it, you won't be the same person who started watching. She had carried that rifle case across 14 countries. It was Accuracy International AXMC, a precision long-range sniper system, caliber 0.338 Lapua Magnum, capable of delivering a round across distances that most soldiers never even trained for. The case was exactly 4 feet 11 inches tall. Emily Carter was 4 feet 9. That 1 inch of difference was the first thing people noticed. Not always, but always eventually. She had learned to hear it in the silence before the laughter. That brief moment, maybe half a second, when people first saw her walking toward them with a weapon bigger than most men's ambitions strapped across her back. That pause, that recalibration, and then the decision, do they say it out loud or do they keep it behind their eyes? The men of Viper team said it out loud, every single one of them. She heard it before she even reached the briefing tent at Fort Sentinel combat base. The Arizona sun was already doing what Arizona suns do in August, pressing down on everything living like it personally had something to prove. The heat came off the tarmac in waves. Her boots were already soaked through. She had been traveling for 19 hours, connecting through 3 different military transport flights, eating a protein bar over Nevada, sleeping 15 minutes somewhere over New Mexico. And when she stepped off that last aircraft, she could already feel the eyes. There were 7 of them standing near the fuel depot. SEAL operators, Viper team, the kind of men who got assigned the missions that other men weren't supposed to know existed. They were tall, broad, built like they had been assembled rather than born. They wore their gear like it was a second skin. They moved the way apex predators move, loose, easy, unhurried, because they had nothing to prove and they knew it. The first one who spoke was a man named Cruz, Sergeant First Class Diego Cruz. 6 feet 2 inches of Texas-born special operations soldier, with 17 confirmed deployments and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from Riverstone. He said, "You lost, sweetheart?" The second one, a younger operator named Briggs, started laughing before Cruz even finished the sentence. "Please tell me she's not the support sniper," Briggs said. "Please, I'm begging." "Nah." That was Torres, Corporal Marcus Torres, the youngest member of Viper team. Even he was shaking his head. "No way. That's got to be somebody's daughter visiting. Maybe a journalist, press in bed or something." Emily stopped walking. She set her rifle case down, not because she was tired, not because she needed the rest. She set it down because she had learned a long time ago that the moment you drop something heavy with complete control, the moment you make it look effortless, people stop underestimating your strength. They just don't always stop underestimating everything else. She reached into her chest pocket and removed her orders. Folded crisp, signed by a brigadier general whose name made 3 of the men visibly straighten. She handed them to Cruz without saying a word. He looked at the paper. He looked at her. He looked at the paper again. "Specialist Emily Carter," he read aloud. "Long-range precision fire support, Operation Iron Eclipse." He folded the paper and handed it back to her. Then he looked at the other men, and something passed between them, that wordless male communication that women in uniform learn to recognize and despise, and he said, "Well, at least she's easy to carry if she gets hit." The laughter that followed was the kind that men use when they want something to hurt, but they don't want to be held accountable for the wound. Emily picked up her rifle case. "Point me to the briefing tent," she said. Her voice was completely level, not cold, not angry, not wounded, Cruz pointed. She walked. And behind her, she heard Briggs say, just quiet enough to be deniable. A doll. They sent us an actual doll. She had heard that word before. The first time was at Fort Bragg. She was 22 years old, 3 weeks into special operations selection, and a sergeant instructor had pointed at her during a timed run and said the word to the man beside him like she wasn't there. Like she was furniture. Like the word was simply the most accurate descriptor available. She had finished that run faster than anyone else on the course that day. That was 7 years ago. She had been hearing the word ever since. She was 29 now. She had 4 combat deployments. She had 22 confirmed long-range engagements, 13 of which exceeded 2,000 meters. She had 3 commendations, 2 of which were classified, one of which had been awarded by a general who told her privately that what she had done in the mountains of a country he couldn't name on record had saved 11 lives and altered the course of an operation that the DOD would not acknowledge for another decade. None of that was in the room when she walked into the briefing tent. In the briefing tent, there was only her size. Captain Ryan Maddox was standing at the map table when she entered. He was the kind of man who filled a room not just physically, though he did that too, standing 6 feet 4 inches in his command posture, but the way some people radiate authority like heat. He had the look of a man who had been through enough wars to stop being afraid of them, but smart enough to never say that out loud. He looked up when she came in. His expression didn't change. That was somehow worse than the laughter outside. "Carter," he said. "Yes, sir. You read the mission brief 3 times. On the transport. Good." He turned back to the map. "You'll be taking the support position on the eastern ridge. Your job is overwatch. You call what you see. You confirm before you engage. You do not deviate from the designated firing lane without my authorization." "Clear, clear." She set down her case and moved to the map. "Sir, I want to flag something about the terrain." He didn't look up. "Go ahead." She leaned over the map and pointed at the canyon marked Black Canyon Pass. "The approach corridor funnels everything through here. It's the only viable route given the timeline. But the geometry is wrong." She traced the cliff lines on either side. "Whoever is waiting for us, and based on the intelligence profile, someone is waiting, has perfect fields of fire from both flanks. The canyon floor is a kill box." Maddox finally looked up. He looked at her the way a professor looks at a student who has answered a question with the wrong formula. "We have satellite imagery from 16 hours ago," he said. "The canyon is clear." 16 hours is a long time, Emily said. "And the weather report shows a sandstorm system building to the southwest. If it moves faster than projected, Carter." His voice didn't rise. "It didn't need to. I've been running combat operations since before you were certified to hold that rifle. We've cleared this kind of terrain 100 times. She looked at him. She wanted to say, "That's exactly why you're vulnerable. Because experience can become its own blind spot. Because the 100th time you do something is the first time you stop really looking at it." She didn't say that. She said, "Yes, sir." That was the moment. That precise, quiet, compressed moment where something true went unspoken because the person who needed to hear it had already decided they didn't need to listen. Outside the tent, she could hear Cruz and Briggs still going. "I give her 20 minutes on the trail before she asks someone to carry the rifle." "Nah, 10. She'll start crying at 15. She picked up her case and walked to her assigned bunk in the support unit quarters. She sat on the edge of the cot. She pressed her palms flat on her knees. She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. She had done this her entire life, this specific breathing exercise, whenever the world reminded her that it had already decided what she was, before she had the chance to show it who she actually was. She had grown up in Harlan County, Kentucky, small town. Small minds in some corners, but also, and she remembered this when she needed it, extraordinary people. Her grandfather had been a coal miner who could name every bird in the county by its call alone. Her mother had worked double shifts at a diner for 8 years so that Emily could take the shooting lessons at the county range that her grandfather said she had a gift for. The gift was real. She had known it at 12 years old when she picked up a bolt-action .22 rifle for the first time and hit a target at 300 yards on her second attempt. The range instructor had walked down to check the target and come back looking at her like she had done something impossible. She had felt in that moment the thing that would define the rest of her life. Not power, not clarity. The moment before a long-range shot, the breath control, the stillness, the mathematics of wind and distance and elevation merging into a single crystalline moment was the only place in her life where no one's opinion of her could reach her. Where her height didn't matter. Where her appearance didn't matter. Where the only thing that existed was the space between her eye and the target and the absolute truth of physics. She had joined the Army at 18. She had specialized in long-range precision fire at 20. She had deployed for the first time at 22, the same year the sergeant at Fort Bragg used the word dull. She had spent 7 years becoming the kind of sniper that special operations units request by name and then express surprise about when they meet her in person. Because they expected someone larger. Because they couldn't reconcile what she could do with how she looked doing it. She opened her rifle case on the bunk and began her pre-mission inspection. This was ritual. Every component, every adjustment, every surface. She checked the barrel, she checked the bolt. She checked the optic, she checked the bipod and the muzzle device and the magazine and the rounds. She did this not because she doubted her own preparation. She did it because preparation was the only thing she had ever truly owned. Cruz appeared in the doorway. "Chow's in 20, he said. She didn't look up from the rifle. "Thank you." He didn't leave. She waited. "Listen," he said finally. His voice had changed. It was quieter now. Not kind exactly, but searching. "You got any actual trigger time, real trigger time? Not range work." She continued her inspection. 22 confirmed engagements. "In what theater?" 3 different ones. A pause. "Longest shot?" 2,480 meters. She set down the bolt and looked at him. Sand conditions. Target was moving. "I made 2 adjustments and took the shot in a 12-second window." Cruz was quiet for a moment. "That's real," he said. "Yes," she said. "It is." He left. She went back to the rifle. She had one more concern that she hadn't been able to voice in the briefing, hadn't even fully formed into language yet. It was a feeling more than a thought, a sniper's instinct sharpened by years of watching terrain and reading silence. The weather report said the sandstorm would hit in 36 hours. But she had grown up reading weather systems in Appalachian valleys where mountains accelerated and redirected pressure fronts in ways that no digital model could fully capture. She had been watching the sky since she landed. She had been watching the color of the light. The way the air smelled. The sandstorm wasn't 36 hours out. It was closer to 12, maybe less. And they were walking into a canyon tomorrow night. She tried to raise this with the mission planning team at 1,800 hours. The meteorological officer, a young lieutenant named Park, looked at his tablet and shook his head. Model shows 38 hours before frontal impact. "We're clear for the operation window." "With respect, sir, I think the model is off," Emily said. The pressure differential across specialists. Park looked at her with the particular brand of condescension that the young reserve for the instinctive. "We have satellite data. We have atmospheric sensors. We have a dedicated meteorological analysis team. Your feeling about the weather." "It's not a feeling," she said. "What is it then?" She paused, because she knew the answer and she also knew how the answer would land. "It's experience," she said, "reading the environment without instruments." Park smiled, not unkindly, just dismissively. "We have better instruments." "Get some rest, specialist." She got some rest. She lay on the cot in the dark and stared at the ceiling of the bunk tent and ran through the mission parameters in her mind. Canyon approach at 2,200 hours. Full dark insertion. Support element her to establish overwatch at the ridge approximately 2 clicks east of the main formation's entry point. Primary objective, overwatch and fire support for a capture operation targeting a high-value individual known to be operating in the region. Clean, simple, the kind of mission that looks straightforward on paper. Those were always the ones that weren't. She thought about the canyon. She thought about the canyon, and she thought about the cliff lines, and she thought about the geometry of a kill box, and she thought about the fact that 9 hostile fighters with mortar capability could fit inside a position that size without, leaving a single footprint visible on a 16-hour-old satellite image. And then she thought about the storm, and she pressed her palms flat on her knees in the dark, and she breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth. At 2,100 hours, Viper team assembled for final gear check. Emily joined them with her rifle case and her rucksack. Cruz looked at her pack. "That's 68 pounds, she said before he asked. I weighed it. I wasn't going to say anything. You were thinking it. He almost smiled. You carrying that the whole way? Yes, the ridge approaches. I know what the ridge approach is, she said. I've been studying the terrain imagery since I landed. He looked at her for a moment. Okay. Maddox gathered them at 2,115. He ran through the brief quickly and efficiently. He was a good commander, Emily could see that. Clear, structured, direct. He knew his men and they knew him, and the unit trust in the room was real and visible. This was not a team that would fall apart under pressure. That made it harder somehow, because he was good at this. And he was still making the wrong call. She raised her hand at the end of the brief. Sir, one more time the canyon approach. Maddox's eyes moved to her. Something tightened at the corners. Carter, I know you've made the decision. I'm not challenging it. I'm asking for 30 seconds to flag a tactical concern for the record. A beat then, 30 seconds. The canyon is the only viable approach in the timeline. I understand that. But if hostile forces have pre-positioned there, which the intelligence profiles just as possible, they have higher ground on both flanks. Our communications will degrade inside the canyon walls. If we lose comms and the sandstorm arrives early. It's not arriving early. If it does, sir, hypothetically. We lose air support, we lose extraction, we lose overwatch sight lines from my designated position. The team would be contained. Maddox looked at her for a long moment. And your recommendation? Alternative approach from the north. Longer, takes an extra 3 hours. But we maintain comms throughout, and we approach the objective from a direction that hostile forces won't have pre-sighted. Maddox turned back to the map. The 3-hour differential takes us past the mission window, he said. We missed the target. The entire operation is compromised. Yes, sir. Then we go the way we planned. He looked up. You ready to do your job, Carter? She looked at him. She thought about what she wanted to say. She thought about the canyon. She thought about the storm. She said, yes, sir. And they moved out. The desert at night was a different animal than the desert in daylight. It didn't press down on you. It swallowed you. The temperature had dropped 40 degrees from the afternoon high, and the air was dry and sharp, and every sound they made seemed to travel in 3 directions at once before disappearing entirely into the dark. The pace was fast, aggressive. Maddox said it, and his men matched it without a word because they had been trained to move like this, efficient, silent, controlled. Emily matched it too. She had been trained the same way. Cruz fell back alongside her about 40 minutes in. You're faster than I expected, he said. People usually are, she said. Surprised, I mean. You always like that? Ready with a response? I've had a lot of practice with the conversation. They moved in silence for a while. Then Cruz said quietly, 2,480 meters. That's not something you make up. No, she said, it isn't. The target at that distance, how do you? He paused. I can't even see what I'm aiming at that distance. You're not supposed to aim at what you see, she said. You aim at where physics says the target will be when the round arrives. The shot happens before the trigger pull. By the time your finger moves, you've already made every decision that matters. Cruz thought about that for a while. That's either very profound or very weird. Little of both, he almost laughed. An hour and a half into the movement, Emily stopped. She stopped so suddenly that Torres, walking behind her, nearly ran into her. Torres started. She held up her fist. Silence. She tilted her head. She was listening. Maddox moved back to her position. Carter, why are you stopped? She held up a single finger. Listen. He started to say something, and Cruz put a hand on his arm, and Maddox, to his credit, stopped. They all listened for 4 seconds, 5, 6. Then Emily said very quietly, the wind changed. She was looking southwest. The stars in that direction had disappeared behind a line of darkness that 2 hours ago had not been there. Maddox followed her gaze. That's the storm, she said. It's not 36 hours out, it's moving. Maddox stared at the dark horizon. He pressed his jaw, he keyed his radio. Weatherman, this is Viper Actual. Give me updated storm timeline, over static. Then Park's voice, Viper Actual, last model update shows approximately 30 hours to frontal impact. Maintain mission profile, over. Emily looked at Maddox. 30 hours, he said, more to himself than to her. Sir, she said. The stars are gone, the pressure is dropping. I can feel it in my Carter. His voice was sharp now. Not angry, sharp. The way you sharpen something when you need it to cut clean. I understand you have concerns, I hear them, but I cannot deviate from a combat mission based on what I'm telling you. He held her eyes. Instinct, he said. No, I cannot. He turned and waved the team forward. Emily stood still for one moment, one single, terrible moment. She looked at the southwestern sky. She knew what she was seeing. She knew what it meant. She picked up her rifle case. She followed the team, because that was her job, because she had her orders. Because there are moments in a soldier's life when you do what you are told and you carry the weight of knowing it is wrong, and you carry that weight alone, without complaint, because the alternative is worse. She followed them into the dark. She followed them toward the canyon. And the storm that no instrument had caught in time came rolling across the desert floor like a wall of God's own silence, enormous and patient and utterly indifferent to the plans of men. She didn't say anything else that night. She didn't have to. The storm would say it for her, and by the time it did, there would be 9 armed men in that canyon waiting for the moment the darkness became complete. Waiting for Viper Team. And they had no idea that the smallest person on the mission, the one they had laughed at, dismissed, mocked, reduced to a word, was the only one who had seen them coming. She had stopped counting the looks a long time ago. Not the stares, not the double takes, not the slow, deliberate scans that men did when they thought they were being subtle, starting at her boots, moving up, stopping somewhere around the rifle case, recalibrating, never quite arriving at her eyes. She had stopped counting those somewhere around deployment number 2, when she realized that counting them was its own kind of wound. Every tally was an acknowledgement. Every acknowledgement was a concession that their opinion had weight. She decided their opinions had no weight. She decided that a long time ago. But decisions are easier in the daylight, in the quiet, when no one is watching. They are harder at 200 hours on a desert trail when 6 men are setting a pace designed to make you fail, and not one of them is looking back to see if you're keeping up. They were not subtle about it. Maddox set the march speed at the front, and the men matched him, and the message was clear and deliberate and spoken in the oldest language soldiers know, the language of physical pressure. If you can't keep up, you don't belong. If you fall behind, you've proved our point for us. If you ask for help, you've already lost. Emily did not fall behind. She matched the pace from the first step, not easily. She was not going to lie to herself about that, not even privately. The rucksack was 68 pounds. The rifle case added another 22. The terrain was loose shale and packed dirt and occasional stretches of rock that required you to place each foot with precision or risk rolling an ankle in the dark. The temperature had dropped into the upper 40s, and the air was thin and sharp, and her lungs were working harder than she let anyone see. But she matched the pace, step for step, minute for minute. 20 minutes in, Briggs looked back. He had clearly expected to see her struggling somewhere behind the formation. When he saw her 3 feet off his left shoulder, he turned forward again without a word. But she saw his jaw tighten. That small thing, that tiny, almost invisible recalibration gave her something she needed right then. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just fuel. The particular kind of fuel that comes from proving a small point to a small mind and storing the energy of it for later when the larger points need to be made. 30 minutes in, Torres tried something different. He slowed almost imperceptibly and let her pull alongside him, then matched her stride and said, in a voice pitched low enough that only she could hear, "You can drop the rifle case. I'll carry it for the next click. Nobody'll know." She looked straight ahead. "I'll know," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Then it's not weakness to accept help." "No," she agreed. "It isn't, but this isn't about weakness. This is about what happens at the end when someone needs to know that rifle is ready. If I didn't carry it, I don't know everything that happened to it on the way here. And in my line of work, that matters." Torres thought about that. "Okay," he said. He fell back into his position. The trail narrowed as they moved deeper into the desert terrain, funneling the formation into a single file line that stretched over almost 200 meters. Maddox at the front, Cruz behind him, then Kowalski, then Torres, then Reyes and Briggs bringing up the middle. Emily had been placed deliberately at the rear, not the tactical rear, not a designated security position, just the back. The end. The place you put people when you want them to understand their position in the hierarchy without saying it directly. She walked at the back of the line and she watched everything. That was the thing they had not considered when they put her there. They had meant it as a demotion. But for a sniper, the rear position is intelligence gathering. Every man in front of you is data. The way they move tells you their conditioning, their confidence, their stress levels, their fatigue. The way they hold their weapons tells you their training. The spaces between them tell you their unit cohesion. She cataloged all of it. Cruz moved like someone who had done this specific trail in his memory 100 times. Fluid, automatic. He was conserving energy without thinking about it, which meant he had reserves he wasn't showing. Kowalski, Master Sergeant Danny Kowalski, 6 feet, even Polish-American kid from Chicago who had made spec ops at 24 and never quite lost the neighborhood edge, was moving slightly heavy on his left side. Old injury probably, hip or knee. He was compensating well, but over distance that compensation would cost him. Torres was the youngest and he moved like it, too fast, too eager, expending energy on enthusiasm rather than efficiency. Briggs moved like a man who was thinking about something other than the terrain. His head was angled slightly wrong. Something was occupying him. She stored all of it. At the 40-minute mark, she picked up the vehicle tracks. She almost missed them because they were old, 24 hours at minimum, and the wind had softened their edges into the surrounding dirt. But she was watching the ground with the same attention she gave a scope, and she caught the difference in texture before her mind fully registered what it was. She stopped, she crouched, she put 2 fingers into the compressed earth and felt the density of the track space and heavy vehicle, not military. Something civilian-bodied but carrying significant weight, which meant either equipment or personnel, and given the direction of the tracks, they were moving toward the canyon, not away from it. She stood. "Viper Actual," she said quietly into her radio. "This is Carter. I've got vehicle tracks at my position. Heavy civilian profile, approximately 24 hours old. Moving toward the canyon." Over. A pause. Then Maddox's voice, flat noted. "How confident are you in the timeline?" "Confident. Track-based density is consistent with post-set temperature drop last night. Someone moved through here last night between 1,900 and 2,200. Another pause, longer. "Copy that. Continue movement." She looked at the tracks for another 2 seconds. "Continue movement." She continued, but in her mind the picture was building. Piece by piece, the canyon geometry, the cliff firing lines, the degraded comms environment, the approaching storm. And now vehicle tracks, heavy vehicle, moving toward the objective the night before the mission. Someone was there. Someone had moved in. Someone was waiting. She pressed her jaw and kept walking. The team reached the first waypoint, a dry riverbed that served as the navigation anchor for the approach at the 90-minute mark. Maddox called a 5-minute halt. Canteens. Map check. Radio sitrip. Emily did not sit down during the halt. She moved 20 meters to the south and crouched at the bank of the dry riverbed and looked at the soil near the edge. Cruz appeared beside her 30 seconds later. "What are you doing?" "Reading the ground," she said. "Reading here." She gestured him down. He crouched beside her reluctantly. She pointed at the soil at the base of the bank. "You see that?" He looked. "Disturbed ground? Someone crossed here." "Multiple individuals. Look at the weight distribution. These aren't 200-pound men moving fast. They're moving slow, and they're carrying something heavy. Mortar tube, maybe, or ammunition crates." She looked up at him. "This crossing is within the last 12 hours. Cruz stared at the ground. He was a good soldier. She could see him running the math. "How many?" he said. "At least 4 crossings. Maybe 6 individuals minimum, based on the spacing." "Could be more." She stood. "They're in the canyon, Cruz. They were here before we left the base." He stood too. They looked at each other. "I'll tell Maddox," he said. She watched him move back to the command position. She watched him pull Maddox aside. She watched Maddox's face during the conversation, the slight tightening around the eyes, the almost imperceptible set of the jaw that commanders develop when they are receiving information they do not want to receive. Then she watched Maddox shake his head. Cruz came back. "He says the intelligence assessment doesn't support." "I know what the intelligence assessment says," Emily said. "I read it. But intelligence assessments are based on information collected before the enemy moved. The enemy doesn't stay still." Cruz looked at her with something new in his eyes. "Not respect, exactly. Not yet. But the beginning of something that might become respect if enough evidence accumulated." "I know," he said quietly. "Then tell him again." "Tell him again, Cruz. Tell him what we found at the riverbed. Tell him both sets of sign together, the vehicle tracks and the foot crossing. Tell him what that combination means." Cruz was quiet for a moment. "What does it mean?" "It means someone pre-positioned heavy weapons in that canyon and then moved a fire team in to operate them. That's not an ambush of opportunity." She held his eyes. "That's a prepared engagement. They knew we were coming. Not this mission specifically, maybe, but someone. They set it up to receive whoever walked through." Cruz pressed his lips together. He went back to Maddox. She watched the conversation again. This time it was longer. Cruz was pushing. She could see it in his posture, the forward lean, the hands. Maddox listened longer this time, but the answer was the same. Cruz returned with the look of a man who had tried and lost. "He says we proceed. He says the intelligence picture doesn't support the kind of threat you're describing. He says," Cruz paused, and she could tell this next part was word for word, "that the support element should focus on their designated assignment and leave tactical assessment to the command element." Emily looked at the canyon in the distance. She looked at the sky to the southwest where the darkness had grown thicker and lower and closer. "Okay," she said. "Carter, I heard you." She picked up her rifle case. "Where's my overwatch position?" Cruz pointed to the ridge hill 350, a jagged spine of rock that ran parallel to the canyon's eastern wall and provided elevation and line of sight into the approach corridor. "Eastern ridge. You'll split from us at the next waypoint and go north 400 meters, then climb." She looked at the ridge. In the dark, it looked like the spine of something sleeping. "When do you enter the canyon?" she said. 40 minutes after you split." "What's my comms check schedule?" "Every 15 minutes. Standard protocol." She started walking. Cruz fell in beside her for the next 10 minutes, which surprised her. He was a senior operator with 17 deployments and no obligation to accompany the support element, and yet he walked alongside her in the dark and said nothing for a long time. And she understood that the nothing he was saying was its own kind of language. Finally, he spoke. "In Mosul," he said, 2017, "we had a sniper support element on a cordon mission. Female operator out of a specialized unit I'm not going to name. Emily said nothing. She let him talk. We did the same thing your colleagues are doing to you, he said. Not as bad, maybe, but close. We didn't think she could handle the position. He paused. She saved 4 of my guys that night, called an attack from a direction we weren't even monitoring, made 2 shots at 1,100 meters in the dark that I still can't explain when I try to describe them to people. What happened to her? Emily said. She's running a training program now, teaching the next generation. I requested her for 2 more operations after that, and she turned me down both times. He almost smiled. Said she didn't work with teams that needed convincing. Emily thought about that. She was right, she said. I know she was. He looked at her. I'm not saying this makes up for what happened on the tarmac. Or tonight. No, she agreed. It doesn't. But I'm watching. I want you to know that. Whatever happens in that canyon, I'm watching. She stopped at the waypoint marker, a rock formation shaped like a broken arm, and turned north toward the ridge. Then watch carefully, she said, because I think tonight is going to require it. She left him there and moved north. The climb to Hill 350 was the hardest physical thing she had done in 3 years. Not because of the elevation's 700 feet of gain over rocky terrain. Not because of the weight she was carrying. Those things were hard, but they were known quantities, things she had trained for, things her body understood how to process. It was hard because she was doing it alone, in the dark, with the sound of the storm growing behind her like something alive, and with the full weight of knowing that 7 people were walking into a prepared engagement, and the only person who had seen it clearly was being sent to a ridge 2 kilometers away. That weight was heavier than the rifle. She climbed. Her hands found the rock faces by feel. Her boots tested each foothold before committing. She moved with the methodical patience of someone who has learned that urgency and rock faces are a dangerous combination, that the fastest climbers are often the ones who don't finish. Halfway up, she paused on a ledge to drink water and check her GPS. She was 230 meters above the canyon floor. She could see the lights of the base camp in the far distance, a faint orange-warm cluster against the black desert. She could see the dark line of the canyon cutting north to south through the terrain. She could see, or thought she could see, at the edge of perception, the movement of the team somewhere below, 7 small shapes in the darkness, moving toward the canyon mouth. And then the wind hit. It came from the southwest, and it came with a sound like a freight train entering a tunnel, and it brought with it the first wall of sand. Not the full storm, not yet, but the leading edge. The advance force. Emily pressed herself against the rock and covered her face with her forearm and waited for the gust to pass. When it did, she looked southwest. The wall of darkness that had been a line on the horizon 2 hours ago was now a mass. Moving fast, moving too fast, she grabbed her radio. Viper Actual, this is Carter. Storm is moving faster than projected. I'm observing the leading edge at my current position on the ridge. Recommend you halt and reassess. Over static. Then Carter, we're in calm shadow from your position. Say again. Over. She pressed the trim button harder, as if that would help. Storm is close. Repeat, storm is close. Maybe 2 hours. Maybe less. Over. More static. Then Maddox's voice, broken and partial. Copy. Maintain position. Continue. Over. She stared at the radio. She could not tell if he had heard her. She could not tell what he had said. She continued climbing. She reached the top of Hill 350 at the 2 hour and 40-minute mark from their departure. Her hands were bleeding from 2 separate places where the rock had cut through her gloves. Her left knee was locked from a slip 40 meters below the summit that she had caught with her right hand in a very specific word she did not usually say in professional settings. But she was up, and the position was exactly what she had known it would be from the topographic maps, a natural shooter's nest. A flat shelf of rock, maybe 4 meters by 6, with a forward edge that dropped straight away into space above the canyon floor 700 feet below. Natural rock formation on both sides providing partial cover. Clear line of sight down the length of the canyon for approximately 3,000 meters. She set up fast. This was muscle memory, the kind of knowledge that lives below conscious thought. Bipod down, rifle positioned, optic aligned, range card mentally constructed from the terrain features she could identify in the available light. Then she pulled out her thermal spotting scope and began scanning the canyon floor. And that was when everything changed. The first heat signature appeared at the far end of the canyon, a cluster of figures, stationary, arranged in a pattern that any trained observer would recognize immediately. Not travelers, not civilians, not a patrol, a firing position. She counted 1, 2, 3. She moved the scope slightly. 4, 5, moved again, 6, 7, 8. She held the scope perfectly still and waited. There are nine figures, arranged in an overlapping coverage pattern that accounted for the canyon's natural choke points. Heavy equipment visible in thermal, the rectangular heat signatures of weapon systems, the distinct profile of a mortar base plate. She had been right. She had been right about all of it. And Viper Team was 40 minutes from walking directly into the center of that formation. She grabbed the radio. Viper Actual, this is Carter. Emergency, I have eyes on 9 hostile elements in the canyon. Heavy weapons confirmed. You are walking into a prepared ambush. Stop your movement. Over. Pure static. She had lost comms the moment she reached the summit. The canyon walls were doing exactly what she had said they would do, deflecting, absorbing, scattering the radio signal into nothing. She tried the alternate frequency, static. She tried the emergency frequency, static. She pressed her back against the rock and stared at the sky. The stars above her were disappearing one by one as the storm's leading mass moved overhead. The temperature was dropping. The wind was picking up again, not gusting anymore, sustained. This was the edge of the main body of the storm now. Not the leading edge, the storm itself. Below her, 7 men were walking toward 9 armed fighters who had been sitting in that canyon long enough to have set up a mortar position, which meant they had been there since before Viper Team left the base, which meant someone had known they were coming, which meant she stopped that line of thought. It didn't matter right now. What mattered right now was that she was 700 feet above a kill box, she had no comms, and the only tool she had was the rifle in her hands. She thought about Captain Maddox. She thought about his voice when he said, "You're a sniper, Carter. Not a commander." And she thought, "No, I'm not a commander. But I'm the only person up here." She checked her ammunition. She carried 32 rounds of 0.338 Lapua Magnum in addition to her standard load, enough for a sustained engagement if she was disciplined. She checked her wind, read the storm was creating complex, unpredictable winds sheer across the canyon, gusting in multiple directions, which meant every shot required a fresh calculation. No 2 shots would be the same. She checked the distance. She ranged the far end of the canyon where the densest cluster of enemy fighters was positioned. The laser rangefinder read 3,047 meters. 3,047 meters. She set the number in her mind. She set the wind in her mind. She set the temperature and the elevation and the barometric pressure falling now, falling fast as the storm came in her mind. And then she waited, because she had orders. She had an authorized engagement envelope and a designated firing lane and a command authorization protocol, and she was supposed to wait for Maddox's instruction before she engaged. She waited 1 minute, 2. Below at the canyon mouth, barely visible in her thermal scope, she could see the first shapes of Viper Team entering the canyon. 7 heat signatures, moving in formation, moving fast, moving directly toward 9 people who were waiting for them. She keyed the radio one more time. Viper Actual. Any station. This is Carter on Hill 350. I have eyes on 9 hostiles at the far end of the canyon. You are in a kill box. Break contact immediately. Break contact now. Over static. The wind took it. The canyon walls took it. Nobody heard her. She looked through the scope. The 9 enemy figures at the far end of the canyon were moving now. Not retreating, not repositioning. The movement was specific and purposeful. The mortar team was adjusting their weapons elevation. The flanking elements were moving into their final firing positions. The commander, she could identify him by his position and his movement patterns, was giving signals. They had seen Viper team entering the canyon. The ambush was about to trigger. She had approximately 90 seconds, maybe less. She thought about orders. She thought about command authority. She thought about the consequences of engaging without authorization, the reports, the hearings, the potential charges, the career she had built shot by shot across 7 years. She thought about Cruz, who said he was watching. She thought about Maddox, who said she wasn't a commander. She thought about her grandfather in Harlan County, who used to say in his quiet, matter-of-fact way, while watching birds through his kitchen window, "The moment you see something true and choose not to act on it, you become part of whatever happens next." She settled behind the rifle. She controlled her breathing. She made her first win calculation. She looked at the mortar team, the most dangerous element. Once that weapon fired, everything below was a crater. She placed her reticle on the figure operating the mortar's elevation adjustment. 3,047 meters, through a building sandstorm. In the dark, with no comms, no authorization, no backup, and no guarantee that any of this would work. She breathed out. She found the space between heartbeats. She pressed the trigger. The rifle spoke. And everything that happened next happened in the space between one world and another, between the world where Viper team walked into that canyon and never came out, and the world where they did. She had chosen which world this was going to be. Now she had to prove it, shot by shot, in the dark, alone, at 3,000 meters, in a sandstorm. She was already working the bolt for the second round. The first shot changed everything. Not because it was loud, the storm swallowed most of the sound before it reached the canyon floor. Not because anyone saw it coming, but because one moment the mortar operator was alive and adjusting his weapon's elevation, and the next moment he simply wasn't. Nobody down in that canyon understood what had happened. Not yet. The mortar team froze for exactly 3 seconds. That was the first gift she gave them, 3 seconds of confusion where they looked at each other, instead of at the canyon mouth where Viper team was still moving, still completely unaware that they had just been pulled back from the edge of something catastrophic. Emily was already working the bolt. The second round was chambered before the first body hit the ground. She had made a decision during those 3 seconds, a tactical decision that came from years of engagement experience, and from something older and colder that lived beneath experience, in the part of a person that survives by knowing things before they can be explained. She would not work the enemy position from closest to farthest. She would work the command and control elements first. Take out the people giving orders. Take out the people coordinating the weapons. Then the mortar team. Then the flanking elements. Without leadership, a prepared ambush becomes 9 separate, terrified individuals in the dark. That was manageable. With leadership intact, it was a coordinated killing machine. That was not. She found the commander. She knew him by the way he moved when the mortar operator went down. Everyone else froze. He moved. He went immediately to the body, assessed it in 2 seconds, then turned to his fighters and started issuing signals. Hand signals. He had trained for comms failure. He had planned for the unexpected. He was good. She respected that for exactly the time it took to put her reticle on him. 3,012 meters. The position had shifted slightly because of his movement. She recalculated the wind. It was gusting from the northwest now, which was different from the initial southwest vector, which meant the storm was rotating, which meant conditions were degrading faster than she had expected. She breathed out. She pressed. The rifle fired. The commander dropped. In the canyon below, Cruz heard something he couldn't name. It was not the sound of a shot, the distance, and the storm distorted that into something barely audible, a faint concussive pressure more felt than heard. What he actually noticed was the absence of something. The mortar team had been visible through his night optic. He had spotted them 30 seconds ago, and was in the process of getting the word to Maddox when the first figure dropped. And then, before he could transmit, the second figure, the one who had started moving with purpose and command, dropped too. He stopped walking, Viper actual hold. He grabbed Maddox's arm. Someone's working the far end. 2 down, enemy side. I think we have fire support active. Maddox stared at him. Carter has to be. She doesn't have authorizations. Sir Cruz's voice was flat and direct. 2 enemy down. We were about 30 seconds from walking into a mortar engagement. I don't think authorization is the issue right now. Maddox looked at the far end of the canyon through his optic. He looked for a long time. All elements hold position, he said into the radio. Maintain cover. Something is active at the far end. Something. He still couldn't say her name in that context. Still couldn't reconcile the idea that the smallest person on this mission was the reason his team was not currently under mortar fire. Emily didn't know any of that. She couldn't see the team clearly enough in the storm to know they had stopped. She couldn't hear anything over the wind. She was operating in the purest possible form of isolation, a single point of consciousness on top of a rock, in a sandstorm, at night, with a rifle and a calculation and a choice she had already made. She found the third target. This one was moving. Smart, he had read the situation faster than the others, and he was relocating, trying to break the pattern, trying to make himself unpredictable. He was moving laterally along the canyon wall, using the rock for partial cover, heading toward a position that would give him an angle on the canyon mouth. An angle on Viper team. She tracked him. Long-range moving target acquisition at 3,000 meters in variable wind is not a skill that can be fully explained in a classroom. It lives in the hands and the eye and the accumulated memory of 10,000 hours of practice. It is the ability to not look at where the target is, but to look at where the target will be, to see the future position, to place the round in the future, to trust the mathematics of motion and physics and time. She tracked him for 4 seconds. She pressed the trigger. He stopped moving, 3 down, 6 remaining. The remaining 6 had now fully understood that they were under fire from an elevated position, and they did what trained fighters do. They scattered and sought cover and began scanning for the shooter. But 3,000 meters in a sandstorm is a distance that defeats most search efforts. They could not hear the shots clearly. They could not see the muzzle flash through the sand and distance. They could not locate the source. To them, their people were simply dying. Without explanation, without warning, without an enemy they could fight back against. That was the second thing Emily understood about long-range precision fire that most people never considered. It was not just about the physical elimination of a threat. It was about what it did to the people watching. When someone is shot at close range by a visible enemy, the response is immediate and instinctive: fight or flight, action or retreat. When someone is killed at 3,000 meters by an invisible source in a sandstorm, the response is something different. It is existential. It breaks the part of the mind that depends on being able to see the danger. It creates a paralysis that is deeper and more debilitating than fear. She was counting on that paralysis to give Viper team the seconds they needed. 4 minutes had passed since the first shot. She was working methodically, deliberately, without rushing, because she had learned that the worst thing a sniper can do is rush. Rushing creates errors. Errors at 3,000 meters mean rounds that miss. Rounds that miss give the enemy information about your position and your capability. She could not afford to give them that. The fourth target had gone prone behind a rock formation. Smart cover. She could see the heat signature in the thermal scope, the body's warmth bleeding around the edges of the rock in a characteristic pattern. She adjusted her elevation for the range and calculated where the body's mass would be relative to the rock's geometry. She pressed. The thermal signature went still. 4 down. In the canyon, Cruz was watching through his night scope with an expression that Kowalski, positioned beside him, would later describe as the look of a man watching someone perform a miracle and trying to decide if he believed in miracles. That's 4, Cruz said quietly. From where? Kowalski whispered. The ridge. She's on the ridge. Kowalski looked at the ridge, at the dark, barely visible spine of Hill 350 rising against the storm-clouded sky. At this distance, in this weather? At this distance, Cruz confirmed. In this weather. Then Kowalski said very quietly, "God." Maddox heard it. He said nothing. But he was watching the ridge too, and whatever was happening behind his eyes in that moment, it was significant enough that Torres noticed it and looked away to give him privacy. 5 minutes and 20 seconds since the first shot. The fifth and sixth enemy fighters had done something unexpected. They had not scattered. They had moved together, a pair operating as a unit, which meant they had a rehearsed contingency plan for exactly this scenario. They were moving along the canyon's southern wall toward a secondary firing position that was partially defilade from the elevated eastern ridge. If they reached it, she would lose the angle. She had approximately 40 seconds before they were in the dead ground. She took the fifth one at 30 seconds. The sixth one, now alone and aware and moving fast, made it to within 10 meters of the defiladed position before she made the calculation, adjusted for the wind shear that the storm was throwing across the canyon mouth, and pressed the trigger. The sixth figure went down 4 meters from cover. 6 down, 3 remaining. 7 minutes since the first shot. The 3 remaining fighters had broken. She could see it in their movement. The tactical pattern was gone, replaced by individual survival instinct. One was moving back the way they had come, toward the canyon's northern exit. One had gone to ground and was not moving. One was doing something she didn't immediately understand, moving in a specific direction with a specific purpose that didn't fit the pattern of retreat. She tracked the purposeful one. He was moving toward the mortar system. He was not retreating. He was trying to complete the mission. That kind of person, the one who goes toward the weapon instead of away from it when everything is collapsing around him, was the most dangerous person remaining on that battlefield. Not because he was the biggest or the best armed, because he was committed in a way that went past fear. She found him in the scope. He had reached the mortar. He was working the elevation. She pressed the trigger. The round traveled 3,061 meters through a sandstorm in the dark and arrived exactly where she had calculated it would arrive. 7 down. She moved immediately to the retreating eighth figure. He was moving fast, almost running, the kind of movement that grief and terror produce in a person, the body trying to outrun what the mind has just understood. She felt something when she tracked him. Not hesitation. Not doubt. Something more complicated, the recognition that the person in her scope was running because he was afraid, and that she understood what it felt like to be afraid and dismissed and alone. She pressed the trigger anyway, because this was war. And the fear she understood did not change what he would do to those 7 people in the canyon if she let him reach the ridgeline and call in their position. 8 down. The 9th fighter had not moved since going to ground 4 minutes ago. Emily watched him. She waited. 8 minutes since the first shot. The storm was hitting full force now. Visibility through the scope was degrading. In real time, the thermal imaging was being affected by the sand, creating artifacts and false signals at the edges of the frame. She was losing resolution, losing clarity. She had maybe another 5 minutes of viable shooting conditions before the storm made any further engagement impossible. The 9th fighter was still down. She ranged his position again. 3,022 meters. She could see his heat signature. He was prone, face down, arms spread. The posture of someone who had surrendered to the ground, trying to disappear into it. She waited. He had no weapon visible, no movement. She waited another 30 seconds. Then he moved. He rose to one knee and turned, and in his hands was a weapon that she recognized immediately, even in thermal, the rectangular profile of a radio handset. He was not raising a weapon. He was calling for backup. She pressed the trigger. 9 shots. 8 minutes and 40 seconds. From 3,000 meters. Through a sandstorm. She set the rifle down on the bipod and pressed her back against the rock, and she breathed. Just breathed. For the first time in 8 minutes and 40 seconds, she was not calculating, not adjusting, not pressing. She was just a human being on a rock in a storm, breathing. Her hands were shaking. She had not noticed them shaking while she was working. That was the strange thing about adrenaline. It holds you steady while you need to be steady. And then when the moment passes, it sends you the bill all at once. She looked at her hands. The cuts from the climb were crusted with dried blood. The right hand had a deep one across the palm that she was going to need to have looked at. The glove on the left hand had torn at the thumb. She pressed them flat on her knees. Breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. Then she grabbed the radio. Viper Actual, this is Carter. 9 hostiles neutralized. How copy? Over. Static, she tried again. More static. The storm was killing comms completely now. She was completely cut off. She looked over the edge of the ridge down into the canyon, 700 feet below. She could see nothing. The storm had reduced visibility to almost zero. Shapes were suggestion. Movement was rumor. The world had compressed to a radius of maybe 20 meters in any direction. She tried the radio a third time. Nothing. She stared at the radio. Then she put it away. Because whatever was happening in that canyon right now, whether Viper team had understood what she had done, whether they were moving, whether they were pinned, whether there were additional threats she hadn't seen, whatever was happening, she could not affect it from 700 feet above it. She needed to get down there. She had not planned for this. The mission plan had her remaining on Hill 350 until extraction of fixed support position, overwatch until the objective was completed, or the team extracted. She had no orders to descend. She had no authorization to move from her designated position. She also had no comms. 9 enemy fighters were dead. The storm was making air support and extraction impossible for at least the next several hours, and 7 operators were somewhere in the canyon below with an unknown tactical situation and no contact with their support element. She picked up her rifle. She started down the ridge. The descent was controlled chaos. Going down was harder than going up, which is always the case with steep rock faces in high wind. Going up, your face is to the rock and your hands are active, and you can see every hold before you take it. Going down, you are working partially blind, feeling for holds with your feet before committing your weight, and the wind, which is now not just present but aggressive, 40 miles per hour sustained with gusts significantly higher, is attacking the one thing you cannot afford to lose, which is your center of gravity. She fell twice. The first fall was controlled. She caught herself on a ledge 5 feet below the slip point with both hands and one knee, held it, recovered, kept moving. The second fall was not controlled. She was 300 feet above the canyon floor when a gust hit her from the left side at the exact moment she was transferring weight from her right foot to her left on a transition between 2 rock faces. The wind moved her 6 inches laterally. 6 inches was the difference between her foot landing on the hold and missing it entirely. She dropped. She fell approximately 12 feet before a rock outcropping caught her right side, not gently, not forgivingly, but absolutely, arresting the fall with a jolt that she felt in every bone she owned. She grabbed the outcropping with both arms and held. She pressed her face against the rock and breathed in the smell of stone and sand and her own blood. She took stock. Right ribs, 2 of them felt wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, but wrong in the way that ribs feel when they are at minimum bruised and at maximum cracked, and the difference between those 2 things is going to become apparent with every breath for the next several weeks. Right knee impacted the rock during the arrest. Moving. Painful. Not structural, probably. Hands, the right palm cut had opened again and was bleeding freely. She looked down. 280 feet to the canyon floor. She kept climbing down because 7 people were down there. Because the storm was going to strand them for hours. Because she had 9 dead fighters and a tactical picture that needed to be communicated to someone who could act on it, and she was the only person who had that picture. Because it was her job, not the job she had been assigned. The job she had chosen. 20 minutes after the descent began, she reached the canyon floor. She landed on both feet, her right knee protesting sharply, and she stood in the dark with sand hitting her face at 40 miles per hour and looked north, which was the direction Viper team should have been coming from, and she saw nothing. She heard something. Voices. She moved toward them. Cruz heard her before he saw her, a sound that didn't match the storm's rhythm, a footfall pattern that his combat-tuned ear flagged as human. He raised his weapon and said loudly enough to carry over the wind, "Who's there?" "Carter," she said. A pause. Then Cruz lowered his weapon and moved forward, and he grabbed her arm, not gently, not with the careful courtesy of someone managing a fragile person, but with the grip of a man who has just experienced relief so intense it expressed itself as physical urgency. "You're bleeding," he said. "I fell on the way down," she said. "What's your status?" "Two men down. Briggs took shrapnel from a secondary before we realized the threat was gone. Not life-threatening. Kowalski has a sprained ankle from taking cover." "Maddox is—" He stopped. "Where is he?" she said. Cruz's expression shifted into something she couldn't fully read in the dark and the storm. "He's at the north position," Cruz said. When we couldn't raise you and the firing stopped, he went forward to assess. He's been there for—" Cruz checked his watch. 11 minutes. Emily looked north. "Alone?" "He wouldn't let anyone go with him," Cruz said. "He's the CO. He said she was already moving." Cruz caught up alongside her. "Carter, you don't have to." "He's been alone in there for 11 minutes, she said. "In a storm. With no comms, after 9 people just died around him." She kept walking. "Yes, I do. She found Maddox 40 meters north. He was standing, not taking cover, not crouching, just standing in the middle of the canyon floor with his rifle slung and his hands at his sides and his face tilted slightly upward toward the storm, and the sand was hitting him, and he wasn't reacting to it at all. He was just standing there." She recognized that posture. She had worn it herself once or twice in different deserts. It was the posture of a person whose internal architecture is being renovated while they are still living in it. Something has been torn down and something else is not yet built, and in the space between, the person just stands in the weather and tries to find their footing. She stopped beside him. She didn't say anything immediately. She stood with him for a moment in the storm. Then Maddox spoke. His voice was different, not broken. This was not a man who broke easily, and she understood that. But it was stripped. The command authority was still there, but the performance of it was gone. What remained was just a man's voice. 9, he said. "Yes," she said, "from the ridge, yes." He turned and looked at her for a long moment. She could see the assessment in his eyes, not the earlier assessment, the one that had found her wanting before she opened her mouth. This was a different kind of looking, the kind that soldiers do when they are trying to reconcile who they thought they were looking at with who they are actually looking at. "You fell on the way down," he said. "Yes, you climbed down anyway." "You needed a status report." He looked at her for another moment. "Carter, sir," she said. "We have 2 wounded and no comms and a storm that's going to ground air support for at least 3 hours. With your permission, I'd like to discuss extraction options." He looked at her. He said, "Go ahead." And for the first time since she had landed at Fort Sentinel, Ryan Maddox listened to Emily Carter fully, without the preloaded conclusion, without the dismissal waiting behind his eyes. And he listened the way good commanders listen when they have understood that someone knows something they need to know. She talked for 4 minutes. She laid out the storm's movement vector, the extraction window, the secondary route she had identified from the ridge that would bypass the canyon mouth and bring them out on the eastern side where the terrain provided some shelter from the wind. She talked about Briggs's wound and the requirement for evacuation priority. She talked about the radio dead zones and the one frequency that had a marginally better chance of reaching base through the storm's interference. Maddox listened to all of it. When she finished, he said, "The eastern route. You're confident in it?" "I identified it from the ridge during setup. I have the waypoints on my GPS, 2 hours. Maybe 2.5 with the wounded." He nodded. "Lead us out," he said. Those 3 words. She heard them the way you hear something you have been waiting to hear for so long that when it finally arrives, it takes a moment to become real. Not because it was praise, it wasn't. Not yet, not exactly. But because it was the first time, in this operation, in this unit, that she had been asked to lead rather than follow. "Yes, sir." She turned east. She walked, and 7 men walked behind her, through the storm, and she guided them with her GPS and her terrain knowledge, and the particular brand of confidence that comes not from certainty, but from preparation, from having done the work, having read the ground, having paid attention when no one was watching, and made decisions when no one could authorize them. Cruz fell in beside her 20 minutes into the movement. He said nothing for a while, just walked. Then 2,480 was your longest before tonight. Yes, tonight was 3,050, 3,047 on the first shot. It varied by target position. He was quiet for a long moment. I've been doing this for 17 years, he said. I've never seen anything like what you did tonight. She kept walking. She wanted to say something true. Something that wasn't deflection and wasn't false modesty and wasn't the performance of humility that women in uniform learn to use as armor. She said, I've been preparing for tonight my whole life. I didn't know it was going to be tonight, but it was always going to be some night. Cruz absorbed that. The doll thing, he said, on the tarmac. Cruz, I know it doesn't, she said. Let it be done. Then, okay, they walked. The storm raged around them and the sand hit their faces and the wind made every step cost twice what it should have. And Emily Carter led 7 men through it because she knew the way and they trusted her now. And that trust earned in the hardest possible currency, paid for in blood and precision, and the willingness to stand alone on a ridge in the dark and make the decision that no one else could make that trust was worth everything. At the 90-minute mark, her GPS showed them 400 meters from the eastern extraction point. Maddox moved up beside her. Carter, sir, the storm warning. You called it hours before our instruments did. Yes. The vehicle tracks, the riverbed crossing, the 9-man position in the canyon. You saw all of it before we entered. She said nothing. It was not a question. He walked beside her in silence for a moment. Then he said, very quietly enough that only she could hear it, which she understood was intentional, I failed my team tonight. I want you to know that I know that. She looked at him. His jaw was set. His eyes were forward. He was not asking for absolution. He was not performing contrition. He was making a statement of fact the way that honest men make statements of fact directly, without ornamentation, accepting the weight of it. You made a decision based on the information you prioritized, she said. I prioritized the wrong information.
Yes, she said.
You did. He absorbed that without flinching. You could have left us there, he said. When comms went down, you had no authorization to engage. You could have maintained your position and followed orders and whatever happened in that canyon. Sir, she said, with respect, I was never going to leave you there. He looked at her. Why? She thought about her grandfather. She thought about Harlan County. She thought about a 12-year-old girl hitting a target at 300 yards and feeling, for the first time, the crystalline clarity of a moment where her size and her appearance and the world's opinions about both ceased to have any meaning at all. She said, because that's what soldiers do. Maddox held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. He fell back to his position and she continued to navigate, and the GPS ticked down the distance to the extraction point, and the storm continued to do what storms do, indiscriminate, magnificent, utterly uninterested in the human drama unfolding within it. 300 meters to 100. She stopped at the extraction point, a flat, partially sheltered depression in the eastern terrain that she had identified from the ridge as the best available landing zone given the storm's reduced window. She pulled out the emergency radio. She tried the frequency she had identified as the strongest through storm interference. Static, she adjusted. More static, she adjusted again, cycling through sub-frequencies with systematic patience. And then broken, fragmented, barely audible a voice. Any Viper station, this is Sentinel base. We have lost comm. Please respond over. She pressed transmit. Sentinel base, this is Specialist Carter, Viper support element. I have Viper team at Eastern Extraction Point. 2 wounded ambulatory. Storm grounded at this position. Request extraction soonest available window. Over. Carter, Sentinel Base, copy 7 Souls 2 WIA. We have a window in approximately 90 minutes. Can you hold over? She looked at the team around her. Briggs, pale but conscious, his wound dressed by Reyes, who had medical training. Kowalski, sitting with his ankle elevated. The others drawn, exhausted, storm-beaten, but present. We can hold, she said. She put the radio down. She sat against the rock wall of the depression, and she pulled her knees up and she pressed her palms flat on them and she breathed. 90 minutes. They could hold for 90 minutes. Torres came and sat beside her. He didn't say anything. He just sat there in the way that young soldiers sometimes do when they don't have words but don't want to be absent either. And after a minute, he reached into his pack and produced a protein bar and held it out to her without looking at her. She took it. She ate it. And the storm raged around them, and the 9 men in that canyon were no longer a threat to anyone. And Viper Team was alive, and Emily Carter sat in the dark and let herself be, for just a few minutes, simply exhausted. The extraction helicopter came in at 347 hours. It came in low and hard, fighting the tail end of the storm. The pilot pushing the aircraft through conditions that the flight manual would have categorized as inadvisable, and that the men on the ground categorized as the most beautiful sound they had ever heard. The rotors beat against the wind with a fury that Emily felt in her sternum before she heard it with her ears, and she was on her feet before anyone else because she had been counting the minutes since the radio contact, and she knew to the second when that window was opening. She popped the signal marker. Orange smoke, immediately torn apart by the wind, but enough the pilot saw it and corrected course, and the helicopter settled into the depression with a controlled aggression that spoke to a level of skill Emily recognized and respected. They moved fast. Briggs first carried between Reyes and Torres, then Kowalski limping hard on the ankle that had swollen to twice its normal size inside his boot. Then the rest of the team, moving in the efficient, compressed way that men move when they are exhausted and operating on the last reserves of professionalism. Emily moved last. She was always going to move last. She was the support element. Last in, last out, that was the job. She climbed into the helicopter and pulled the door, and the aircraft was moving before she had found her seat, lifting hard and fast and banking east away from the storm's remaining body. And the vibration of the airframe and the noise of the rotors was so total and so overwhelming after hours of wind and sand and silence that she felt it like a physical reset, like the world had rebooted. And the new version was loud and mechanical and safe. Maddox was across from her. He was looking at her. She met his eyes. He held her gaze for 3 seconds, long enough to be intentional, not long enough to require explanation, and then he looked away. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Cruz was beside her. He had been beside her since the extraction point, not intrusively, not with words, just present. She understood it as its own kind of statement. A man who had stood on the tarmac and laughed was now choosing proximity, and the choice meant something even if he never put language to it. Briggs was semi-conscious across the helicopter's floor, Reyes monitoring his wound with the focused who has done emergency field medicine enough times that it has become its own form of meditation. The shrapnel had caught him across the left side, not fatal. The field assessment had determined, but requiring surgical attention before infection became the actual threat. Kowalski had his ankle elevated on a kit bag and his eyes closed and his lips moving slightly, which Torres had privately told Emily earlier was what Kowalski did when he was in pain, but refused to acknowledge it. He recited baseball statistics. Every at-bat, every ERA. He had the 1,927 Yankees completely memorized and had never explained why. The helicopter flew. Emily leaned her head back against the airframe and closed her eyes for the first time since the mission began. She did not sleep. Sleep was not available to her yet. Her nervous system was still running on the elevated chemistry of the past several hours, still processing what had happened, not the technical execution of it, which her trained mind had already filed and cataloged, but the human weight of it. 9 lives ended by her hand, 9 decisions made in the space between heartbeats, each one final and permanent and irreversible. She had ended lives before. This was not her first combat engagement. But she had never done it at this scale, in these conditions, in this isolation. She had never done it with no authorization, no backup, and no certainty that she was making the right call until the moment after it was already made. She replayed each shot in her mind, not to second guess. She was past second guessing, but because she believed that a person who takes lives in the execution of their duty owes those lives the accounting. They owe the memory of each decision. They owe the weight of it carried forward because the alternative, the numbing, the detachment, the convenient forgetting that was how people became something they didn't intend to become. She was not going to forget. She was going to carry it. That was the deal she had made with herself a long time ago. Fort Sentinel appeared in the helicopter's windscreen. At 423 hours, the base lights a grid of orange and white against the desert floor. The pilot brought them in smooth despite the lingering wind, and the landing was firm and clean, and the moment the skids touched, the ground crew was at the doors. Medical team took Briggs immediately. He was conscious enough to say, "I'm fine," as they loaded him onto the stretcher, which made Torres say, "You are absolutely not fine, man," which made Briggs almost laugh, which made him wince, which made Torres look guilty. Kowalski walked off the helicopter on his own. He refused the wheelchair. He accepted the crutch with the expression of a man accepting a parking ticket, resigned, slightly resentful, already planning how soon he could get rid of it. Emily stepped off last. The ground crew medic saw her hands immediately. "Specialist, you need to—" "In a minute," she said. "Ma'am, that cut on your right palm." "1 minute," she said. She stood on the tarmac and she looked at the sky. The storm had moved east, its rear edge still visible as a dark mass against the pre-dawn gray. The stars were coming back, not all of them, not yet, but at the western edge of the sky, she could see them. Faint, present. She had looked at those same stars from the top of hill 358 hours ago and counted the ones going out and understood what it meant. She breathed in, she breathed out. The medic touched her arm gently. "Now," he said, "now," she said. The base medical facility was a clinical rectangle of bright light and antiseptic smell and controlled efficiency. The medic cleaned and closed. The right palm cut 7 stitches, delivered with the particular combination of speed and care that military medicine perfects, and wrapped both hands and assessed the, which turned out to be 2 cracked rather than 2 bruised, and taped them and told her to avoid strenuous activity, which under the circumstances was the funniest thing she had heard in days, though she did not say so. She was sitting on the treatment table with her wrapped hands in her lap, and her eyes closed when she heard the door. She knew the footsteps. "Sir," she said without opening her eyes. Maddox came in and stood near the door. "How bad?" he said. 2 cracked ribs. Nothing structural. You climbed down a 700-foot ridge with cracked ribs. "I cracked them on the way down," she said. "So technically I climbed down and then cracked them." He was quiet for a moment. "That distinction seems important to you." "Sequence matters," she said, "in my line of work." He came closer. He sat in the chair across from the treatment table, the chair meant for anxious family members, which seemed appropriate in some sideways way she didn't examine too closely. "I've been trying," he said, "to figure out what to say to you." She opened her eyes. He looked. She searched for the right word. "Reduced." Not diminished, not broken, but like something had been taken off him that he had been carrying for a long time without knowing it, and the lightness of its absence was disorienting. "The report," he said, "the official after action. I need to write it. I know. There are things in it that are going to be uncomfortable. For me, specifically." She waited. "I disregarded a tactical warning from the support element," he said. 3 times. I proceeded on a route that placed the team in a prepared engagement. I failed to adapt when the storm moved faster than projected, which the support element had also warned about." He paused. "And then the support element, operating without authorization, without comms, and without backup, neutralized 9 enemy combatants at a range and under conditions that, I'm going to be honest with you, Carter, I still cannot fully process." She said nothing. "That report," he said, is going to reflect all of those things accurately. Okay, she said, including the part where I told you that you weren't a commander and to stay in your lane. She looked at him steadily. What do you want from me, sir? He seemed slightly surprised by the directness of the question. Then he said nothing. I'm not here to ask you for anything. I'm here because he started again. I'm here because I owe you an accounting. The way you owed those 9 men an accounting. I saw it in your face on the helicopter. I recognized it. She was quiet. I judged you before I looked at you, he said. I decided what you were before you opened your mouth. That decision almost got 7 people killed. He held her eyes. I need you to know that I understand that, not as an apology. As a fact, she thought about what to say. She thought about 7 years of facts like this, 7 years of being pre-decided, pre-categorized, pre-depissed. 7 years of carrying the extra weight of other people's conclusions. 7 years of arriving at places and being the person everyone had already decided didn't belong. She said, write the report accurately, sir. That's what I need from you. He nodded once. He stood. He moved toward the door. Then he stopped, and he turned, and he said one more thing. The shot at 3047, the first one. The mortar operator. He paused. I've been running numbers in my head since we extracted. Wind speed, variance, thermal interference, target movement. I've talked to 2 of the best shooters I've ever served with. Neither one of them could tell me they would take that shot in those conditions. She said nothing. You didn't hesitate, he said. There wasn't time to hesitate, she said. That's not what I mean, he said. I mean, you had already decided. Before you pressed the trigger, you had already committed to the outcome. He looked at her for a long moment. How do you do that? She thought about it honestly. She said, I stopped asking the world's permission a long time ago. Maddox absorbed that. He nodded. He left. She sat in the bright medical room with her wrapped hands in her lap and the antiseptic smell around her and the sound of the base coming alive outside as dawn approached. And she let herself feel just for a few minutes the full weight of everything that had happened. The weight of the ridge, the weight of the 9 shots, the weight of the decision she had made alone on a rock in a sandstorm with no one watching. She pressed her palms flat on her knees. She breathed. Then she got up because there was still work to do. The debrief began at 600 hours in the main operations center, a room that smelled of stale coffee and contained several people who had not been on the mission and were therefore operating on reports and radio. Intercepts and a great deal of institutional urgency. Colonel James Whitfield ran the debrief. He was the senior officer at Fort Sentinel, a man in his mid-50s who had the careful, measured quality of someone who had learned to hear everything before he said anything. He sat at the head of the table, and he had a legal pad in front of him, and he looked at each person in the room before he said a word. Then he said 9 confirmed neutralizations, 3,047-meter engagement distance, 0 friendly fatalities, sandstorm conditions. He paused. I want to hear everything. Start from the beginning. Maddox started. He spoke for 14 minutes. He laid out the mission plan, the insertion, the terrain warnings he had received and disregarded, the point at which comms failed, the moment in the canyon when 2 enemy fighters dropped without explanation, and the team realized slowly, then all at once that someone was working the far end of the position from an elevation they hadn't known was covered. He did not soften anything. He did not use passive construction or institutional language to diffuse the responsibility. He said, I decided, and I disregarded, and I was wrong in the plain declarative voice of someone who had accepted those sentences before he entered the room. Whitfield listened without expression. Cruz spoke next. He described the riverbed crossing track, the vehicle sign, his conversations with Emily, the moment he tried to get Maddox to change the approach and failed. He was precise and without embellishment. He described the sound, or rather the absence of sound, that preceded each enemy drop. He described the moment he looked at the ridge through his scope and understood what was happening up there. She was alone, he said. No comms, no authorization. No visibility from up there into what was happening with us. She was working off a thermal scope in a sandstorm, and she made 9 shots at 3,000 meters and all 9 connected. He paused. I've been in special operations for 17 years. I don't have a frame of reference for that. Whitfield wrote something on his legal pad. Then he looked at Emily, Specialist Carter, he said. Walk me through your decision to engage. She had been sitting at the far end of the table not by assignment, just by the informal physics of seniority and rank that tends to sort people in rooms like this. She was the lowest rank present. She was the only woman. She was the person who had violated command protocol by engaging without authorization. She was also the reason everyone else in the room was alive to sit in it. She walked Whitfield through it, precisely, methodic. The vehicle tracks, the riverbed crossing, storm's arrival timing. The loss of comms, the thermal scope view of 9 enemy fighters at the far end of the canyon with a mortar position ready to engage. The 40 seconds she had before the mortar operator completed his elevation adjustment. The decision, she used specific language. She said, I made the decision to engage without authorization because I calculated that the time required to restore comms and obtain authorization exceeded the time available before the mortar team fired on Viper Team's position. She paused. I understood that this decision carried consequences for my career and my standing within the command structure. I made it anyway because the alternative was 7 friendly fatalities. The room was very quiet. Whitfield said, and the descent from Hill 350? I had no comms and no way to assess the team's status from the ridge. The engagement was complete. The extraction was going to require navigation through storm conditions on an alternative route I had identified. I was the only person who had that route. She held Whitfield's gaze. I came down because they needed me on the ground. Whitfield wrote on his legal pad for a long moment. Then he said the decision to engage without authorization is technically a protocol violation. The room tensed. However, Whitfield continued, the circumstances of that decision, loss of comms, imminent threat to friendly forces, no available alternative, create a compelling case for tactical necessity. He looked at Emily. My assessment is that you made the correct call under impossible conditions. She said nothing. The more significant matter, Whitfield said, and now he looked around the table at everyone, is the series of decisions that created those conditions in the first place. He looked at Maddox. Maddox did not look away. What followed was a conversation that Emily would remember for the rest of her career, not because of the institutional language or the formal assessments, but because of what happened between the words. Whitfield asked questions that had edges. Maddox answered them without hiding from those edges. The men around the table listened and participated, and several of them, crews especially, said things that were honest in ways that institutional settings rarely produce honesty. And then Whitfield said something that stopped the room. There is an additional matter, he said, classified, that I am going to address with Specialist Carter separately. The rest of you are dismissed. The men filed out. Cruz was last. He caught Emily's eye on the way out and held it for a moment, that same look of the beginning of something that might become respect, and then he was gone, and the door closed, and it was just Emily and Whitfield in the operations center. Whitfield put down his legal pad. He said, what I'm about to tell you does not leave this room until it is formally processed through the appropriate channels. Understood? Understood, she said. The 9 men in that canyon were not a random ambush team. She went still. The intelligence picture we had on the high-value target, the capture objective for Operation Iron Eclipse, was partially incorrect. He paused. The HVT was not at the target location. He was in the canyon. The sentence landed like a stone in still water, and the rings it sent out touched everything. She said he was one of the 9. Based on preliminary identification of the bodies, yes. Whitfield held her gaze. The commander you neutralized, second shot. The man who moved to assess the first casualty and then began issuing signals. She had known him by the way he moved. She had respected him for exactly the time it took to put her reticle on him. The mission objective, she said slowly, was captured. Yes, and I made the only decision available to you with the information you had, in the time you had, to protect 7 lives. Whitfield's voice was measured and deliberate. That is the assessment of this command. That is what will be in the report. There is no ambiguity here, Carter. I want that clearly understood. She absorbed it. She sat with it. She thought about the figure in the thermal scope, the way he had assessed the first body and turned and started giving orders. The quality of his movement, the experience it spoke to. She said, who was he? Whitfield was quiet for a moment. Someone we had been trying to locate for 3 years, he said. Someone whose removal from the operational theater changes the picture significantly for a mission set I cannot describe to you in this setting. She nodded. The secondary effect of your engagement, Whitfield said, in terms of strategic impact we are still assessing. But the preliminary view is that it is significant. She pressed her palms flat on the table. She breathed. I need you to understand, Whitfield said, that what you did tonight, the shooting, yes, but also the warning. The tracks you read, the storm you called, the route you navigated on the way out. All of it will be documented and assessed at the highest levels of this command. He paused. Fine. There are people who are going to want to talk to you, Carter. Not to debrief you. To understand how you did what you did. She looked at him. I did my job, she said. You did significantly more than your job. Then I did my job as I understand it, she said, which is that the job is whatever the mission requires, not whatever the assignment says. Whitfield looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, your grandfather, the coal miner. He's still alive? She blinked. How do you know about my grandfather? I read files, he simply. Is he alive? Yes. 81, still in Harlan County. Good, said Whitfield. Someone should tell him. She didn't know what to say to that. She said nothing. Whitfield stood. Get some sleep, specialist. Report to my office at 1,400 hours. Bring your written account of the engagement, every shot, every calculation, everything you remember. He moved toward the door. This is not over. What happens in that report affects people well above both our pay grades. He left. Emily sat alone in the operations center. The bright lights, the smell of coffee, the sound of the bass outside the windows, fully awake now, the morning shift replacing the night shift, the ordinary machinery of a military installation running its ordinary course, entirely unaware that 7 hours ago, 9 people died in a canyon and 7 people didn't. She thought about the commander in her scope. She thought about the quality of his movement. She thought about the fact that she had been right about everything, the canyon, the storm, the threat, all of it, and that being right had not felt the way she expected it to feel. It had not felt like vindication. It had felt like weight. She thought about what Maddox had said. I stopped asking the world's permission a long time ago. Her own words. She had meant them when she said them. She meant them now. But she also understood, sitting in that room in the early morning light, that the world's permission was a moving target. That there were rooms like this one that she had never been invited into. That there were conversations happening about her, about what she had done and what it meant, and what should be done with someone who could do it that she was not part of. She had no control over any of that. What she had control over was what she had always had control over. The preparation, the work, the moment of clarity between the breath and the trigger. She stood up, she walked to the door. Cruz was in the hallway. She looked at him. You heard? She said. Some of it, he said. Walls in this building are not as thick as they think. She walked past him. He fell into step beside her. The HVT, he said. Cruz, I know, classified. I'm not asking you to confirm anything. He was quiet for a moment. But I've been in this business long enough to do the math. She walked. If the math is what I think it is, he said, what you did in that canyon tonight, it's not going to stay in this canyon. She said nothing. Carter. He stopped walking. She stopped too and turned. He looked at her with the full weight of 17 years of combat service behind his eyes. Whatever comes next, the reports, the assessments, the people Whitfield mentioned who are going to want to talk to you, whatever that is. I know how to handle rooms, she said. I know you do, he said. I'm saying you shouldn't have to handle them alone. She looked at him. That word, alone. She had been alone on that ridge for 8 minutes and 40 seconds that felt like 8 years, and the aloneness had been total and absolute, and she had made peace with it in the only way she knew how, by focusing on the work, by making the next decision, by refusing to let the aloneness become the thing she thought about. She said, "Are you offering to walk into rooms with me, Cruz?" He said, "I'm offering to be the guy who tells people what I saw tonight. Every time someone in a room needs to be told." She held his eyes. "That's not nothing," she said. "No," he said, "it isn't." She turned and kept walking. Her hands hurt, her ribs hurt. Her knee had stiffened on the flight back and was going to be genuinely unpleasant for the next several days. She needed sleep. She needed food that was not a protein bar eaten in a storm. She needed, probably, to call her grandfather in Harlan County and hear his voice, which she had not done in 6 weeks. She needed all of those things. But first she went back to her bunk and she opened her rifle case, and she performed the post-mission maintenance that every round sent downrange requires: the cleaning, the inspection, the careful attention to every surface and mechanism that had worked in extraordinary conditions and needed to be prepared to work again. She did this because the rifle was her responsibility. She did this because preparation is the only thing she had ever truly owned. She did this because somewhere in the methodical, quiet work of taking care of the tool that had taken care of 7 lives, she could find not peace, exactly, not yet, but the beginning of the way back to herself. The rifle was clean at 742 hours. She closed the case. She lay back on the cot. She pressed her palms flat on her knees. She breathed in, she breathed out. And outside the bunk tent, Fort Sentinel continued its morning, and the storm continued its eastward movement. And in a canyon in the desert, 9 people who had been waiting for Viper Team would wait there forever now. And the woman who had made that decision lay on a military cot in Arizona, with wrapped hands and cracked ribs, and closed her eyes, and began finally to rest. She slept for 4 hours and 19 minutes. She knew the exact number because she had looked at her watch when she closed her eyes, and she looked at it again the moment she opened them, which was a habit she had developed in the field, the instinct to always know how much time had passed. Because time in combat is the one resource that does not replenish and cannot be borrowed. 4 hours and 19 minutes, it was not enough. It was what she had. She got up. Her ribs announced themselves immediately, a sharp, declarative pain on the right side that reminded her with every breath that 2 of them were cracked and that the tape the medic had applied was doing its job but was not magic. Her right knee had stiffened overnight into something that required a deliberate, careful first step before it would agree to cooperate. Her hands, wrapped and stitched, were functional but slow. She stood at the edge of her cot for a moment. She pressed her palms flat on her knees. She breathed. Then she got dressed and went to find coffee. The mess hall at 1,100 hours was between rushes, too late for the breakfast crowd, too early for lunch. It held a scattered collection of support staff, administrative personnel, and 2 members of Viper Team who looked up when she walked in and immediately looked at each other with the kind of weighted glance that told her she had been a topic of conversation before she arrived. Torres was one of them. He stood up when he saw her. Not a formal gesture, not military courtesy. Just a man standing up because someone walked into the room, and standing felt like the right response to their presence. That had never happened to her at Fort Sentinel before. She got coffee, she got food, she sat. Torres came over without being invited. He sat across from her and put his hands on the table and looked at her with the particular earnestness of a young soldier who has something to say and has been rehearsing it and has now decided that rehearsed is not how he wants to say it. "I was one of the ones who laughed," he said, "on the tarmac. When Cruz called you a doll, I want you to know I don't want to make it about me. I know an apology doesn't." He stopped, started again. "I just need to say it. Because I've been sitting here for 4 hours trying to figure out how to say it, and I can't find the right words. So I'm just going to say it directly. What you did last night, what you did for us, I didn't deserve it. None of us did, and I'm sorry for my part in making you feel like you didn't belong here. She looked at him. He was 24 years old. She could see it in the set of his face, the way the events of the last 12 hours had moved through him and left marks that were going to be permanent. Some experiences age you, some of them grow you. The best ones do both at the same time. She said, Torres, how many deployments? This was my third, he said. Third deployment. And last night was your first time under a prepared ambush with a mortar position. Yes, you held, she said. You maintained your position. You followed your team leader's directions, and when it was time to move, you moved. You carried Briggs to the extraction point. She looked at him steadily. That matters. What happened on the tarmac matters, too. Both things are true. He absorbed that. How do you do that, he said. Do what? Hold both things. Without it eating you. She thought about it honestly. Practice, she said. And the understanding that people are more than their worst moment. Same as they're more than their best one. She picked up her coffee. You had a bad moment on the tarmac. Last night you had a better one. Keep accumulating better ones. He nodded slowly. He started to say something else. Her radio crackled. Whitfield, report to my office. Now she stood. Torres looked up at her. Go, he said. She went. The walk to Whitfield's office took her past the operations center, past the medical facility where she could see through the window that Briggs was sitting up in his bed looking alert and irritated, which was a good sign, and past the motor pool where Kowalski was standing outside on his crutch, talking to a mechanic and gesturing with the force of a man who had opinions about engines and was not going to let a sprained ankle their expression. She knocked on Whitfield's door. Come, she entered. There were 3 people in the room she had not expected. Whitfield was behind his desk. To his right sat a woman in civilian clothes, mid-40s, precise, with the specific quality of stillness that Emily associated with intelligence community personnel who had learned to make themselves forgettable and then forgotten that they were doing it. To Whitfield's left sat a man in Army uniform with the rank of Brigadier General and a name tape that read Harker. Emily came to attention. At ease, Whitfield said. Sit down. She sat. Harker looked at her for a moment with the evaluative focus of someone who is confirming that what they were told matches what they are seeing and finding the match surprising in the specific way that Emily had been surprising people her entire career. Specialist Carter, Harker said, I'm going to dispense with the extended preamble. The woman to my left is from an organization I'm not going to name in this setting. She has been read into the full operational picture of what happened in that canyon last night, including the identification of the 9th target. She has questions for you. Answer them fully and accurately. Emily looked at the woman. The woman said the commander. Second shot. Tell me about the moment you acquired him. Emily described it. The initial shot on the mortar operator, the 3-second freeze of the enemy element, the commander moving immediately and purposefully while everyone else was still processing. The assessment she made in real time that his movement pattern indicated training and command experience. The decision to prioritize him. The woman listened without expression. You identified him as the command element based purely on behavioral observation, she said. In a thermoscope at 3,000 meters in a sandstorm. Yes, you had no intelligence picture of his appearance or profile. No, I had his movement, and that was sufficient. In my assessment, yes. The woman looked at Harker. Something passed between them, the compressed language of people who have worked together long enough to communicate in fractions. Harker said to Emily, the man you identified and neutralized as the command element has been confirmed as a high-value target that this organization and several allied services have been actively pursuing for 38 months. 3 previous operations targeting him failed. He was known to have extremely sophisticated counter-surveillance awareness. Harker paused. Every previous attempt to locate him was compromised before contact. Last night, he walked into a situation he did not to surveil in advance because it was not his operation he was there to observe and advise a local ambush cell. Another pause. He did not know you were there. Emily held very still. He was not on our radar for that location, Harker continued. He was not on anyone's radar for that location. His presence was a tactical coincidence produced by the specific approach route that Captain Maddox chose, which, as it happens, was the route you argued against. She let that sit in the room for a moment. She said, if Captain Maddox had taken my recommended route, he would not have been in the canyon, the woman said. He would have been elsewhere. He would still be active. The room was very quiet. Emily understood what she was being told. She was being told that the thing she had spent the first part of this mission fighting against, the decision she had argued against, warned against, been dismissed about, had produced, by accident, by the specific geography of a wrong choice, the elimination of a target that 38 months of directed effort had failed to reach. She was being told that the worst moment of the planning process had accidentally become the most significant moment of the outcome. She did not know how to feel about that. She was not going to pretend that she did. She said, what do you need from me? The woman leaned forward slightly. A complete written account of the engagement, every shot, every decision, every calculation, not for the institutional record, for our analytical purposes. We want to understand the decision architecture. Specifically, we want to understand how you read the command element from behavioral observation at that range and in those conditions. I can write that, Emily said. We also, the woman said, and now her voice shifted very slightly, not warmer, but less closed. Want to discuss your future assignments. Emily looked at her. There are operational requirements, the woman said, for the kind of capability you demonstrated last night. Precision long-range engagement in complex environments with degraded support requiring real-time behavioral analysis of targets. It is not a common combination of skills. She paused. We would like to talk to you about a role that makes use of all of it. Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about 7 years. She thought about every room she had walked into. She thought about the tarmac. She thought about Cruz's laugh and Maddox's dismissal and the specific isolating weight of being pre-decided before she opened her mouth. She said, what kind of role? Harker said, the kind that doesn't have a job title you'll find on any organizational chart. The kind where the people you work with have been selected specifically because they understand that capability is not correlated with appearance. He held her eyes. The kind where nobody on the tarmac is going to call you a dull specialist. Because the people on the tarmac will have been chosen specifically to never make that mistake. She absorbed it. She said, I need to know more before I answer. Of course, the woman said. She produced a card plain, no insignia, just a phone number, and placed it on the desk in front of Emily. Take 2 weeks. Talk to no one about this conversation. Then call that number. Emily took the card. She looked at it for a moment. She put it in her chest pocket. There's one more thing, Harker said. He opened a folder on Whitfield's desk and removed a document and slid it across the desk toward her. Captain Maddox submitted this morning. Before I arrived, she picked it up. It was a formal commendation recommendation. Signed by Maddox. Addressed upward through the chain of command, requesting a full review of her engagement for recognition at the appropriate level. The language was direct and specific and unembellished. It described what she had done with the technical precision of someone who understood exactly what they were describing, and it ended with a sentence that she read twice before she fully processed it. The sentence read, in my professional assessment, Specialist Carter's actions on the night of the operation represent the most consequential and skillfully executed individual engagement I have witnessed in 22 years of special operations service. The failure to recognize and act on her tactical assessments prior to mission insertion was mine alone. This recommendation is submitted not to compensate for that failure, but to ensure the record accurately reflects the truth of what occurred. She set the document down. She pressed her palms flat on the table. She breathed. Harker was watching her. That man, he said, will carry what happened in that canyon for the rest of his career. Not as shame, as education, he paused. Some commanders learn that way. Most don't get the chance, because the lesson arrives too late. She stood. She said, "Thank you, sir." She left. In the hallway outside Whitfield's office, she stood for a moment with her back against the wall and the playing card in her chest pocket and the memory of Maddox's sentence in her mind. The most consequential and skillfully executed individual engagement I have witnessed in 22 years. She felt something move through her. Not pride or not only pride. Something larger and less nameable. The feeling of a door opening that she had been pushing against for so long she had begun to wonder if it was a wall. She walked back to the medical facility. Briggs was still sitting up in his bed when she pushed the door open. He looked at her. He had the gray, tight around the edges look of someone managing real pain with the performance of not managing it, which she recognized because she had been wearing the same expression all morning on account of her ribs. "Carter," he said. "Briggs, they tell you I'm fine?" "They told me you'll be fine," she said. "There's a tense difference." He almost smiled. Then he said, "I heard you come down the ridge." She stopped. "What?" "I was on the canyon floor when you descended." After the firing stopped, we were trying to figure out what had happened, and we heard movement on the eastern face and Cruz almost shot you. He paused. "He said your name and then I heard you answer and He stopped. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. When he looked back, his eyes were different. "I was the one who called you a doll." She said nothing. "Not Cruz. Cruz said it first. But the thing that caught on that was me. I said it loud enough to make sure everyone heard it. Because I thought it was funny." He pressed his mouth together. "I thought it was funny, and now you have stitches in your hand and cracked ribs from climbing down a ridge to come find us." She pulled the chair beside his bed and sat down. She said, "Why did you say it?" He looked at her. "What? The doll thing? Why, not just because you thought it was funny. That's not the whole answer. Why?" He was quiet for a moment. She waited. He said, "Because you scared me."
She had not expected that.
"You walked off that transport and you were carrying that rifle case and you were so certain. I can't explain it better than that. You were just certain in a way that most people aren't. Like you knew exactly where you were going and why, and you didn't need anyone to confirm it." He paused. "And I didn't know what to do with that, so I tried to make you small." She absorbed that. She thought about it honestly. She said, "I've been hearing that word since I was 22. From different people, in different places, for different reasons. But that one, the certainty one, that's new." She looked at him. "Nobody ever told me they said it because they were afraid." "Well," he said, "now you know." She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "You held your position last night. When the shrapnel hit you, you didn't break formation." "I couldn't exactly run," he said. "You could have." "Wounded men run. It's instinct." She held his eyes. "You held, that matters." He looked at the ceiling again. She stood. "Recover fast," she said. "The team needs its people." She left. In the hallway, she almost walked directly into Cruz, who was standing with a coffee cup, and the expression of a man who had been listening to more conversations than he was supposed to today and had given up pretending otherwise. She looked at him. "You almost shot me on the way down," she said. "I didn't," he said, "because you called my name first." "I did," he said, "and you answered so." He shrugged. "No harm." She walked beside him toward the operations building, and they were quiet for half a block, and then Cruz said, "Harker's here." "I know," she said. "He doesn't come to Fort Sentinel for routine debriefs," Cruz said. "He comes when something significant happened." She said nothing. "Whatever he told you in there," Cruz said, "whatever comes next, I meant what I said. Last night and this morning, you shouldn't have to walk into rooms alone." She looked at him sideways. "You know what the problem with that offer is," she said. "What?" "It assumes I've been walking into rooms alone because I had to," she said. "Not because I chose to." He thought about that. "Why would you choose to?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Because when you walk in alone," she said, "and you do the thing anyway, there's no question about how it happened." No one can say someone helped you or vouched for you or carried part of it. The outcome belongs entirely to you. She paused. When the world has spent years telling you that you can't do something, the most important thing is to do it in a way that leaves no room for alternative interpretation. Cruz was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That's the loneliest thing I've ever heard." "Yes," she said. "It is." They walked. After a while, Cruz said, "What if you didn't have to choose anymore? What if the room already knew because they saw it, because they were there and there was no alternative interpretation available?" She thought about Maddox's sentence in the commendation. She thought about Torres standing up when she walked in. She thought about Whitfield saying, "Write the report accurately," and Harker saying, "Nobody on the tarmac is going to call you a doll." She said, "Then I suppose it's a different kind of room." "It is," Cruz said. "It's the kind of room you've already earned your way into." She stopped walking. She turned and looked at him, really looked at him, at the 17 years behind his eyes, and the laugh on the tarmac that he carried now with the visible weight of a man who has understood what his laugh cost, and decided to understand it rather than excuse it. She said, "You're different than you were yesterday." "I am," he said, without apology and without performance. "Just fact." "Why?" he said, "Because I watched someone do something I couldn't do." And the honest response to watching that is not to resent it. It's to become someone who deserves to be in the room when it happens again. She held his eyes for a moment. Then she nodded. They walked the rest of the way to the operations building in comfortable silence, which was its own kind of language, the language of two soldiers who have been through the same fire from different positions and come out the other side with something that neither of them had when they started. At 1,400 hours, she sat back down in Whitfield's office, just the two of them this time, and she delivered her written account of the engagement. Every shot, every calculation, every decision, and the reasoning behind it. She had written it in the 4 hours before her meeting with Harker, in the clear, precise language of a professional who understands that accuracy is a form of respect for the record. Whitfield read it without interrupting. When he finished, he set it down. He said, "You know what this document is, beyond the operational record?" She said, "What?" "It's a textbook," he said, "not immediately. Maybe not for years. But this, the decision process, the target prioritization, the behavioral read, all of it, this is going to be studied." He looked at her. "People are going to learn from what you did." She was quiet. She had not thought about it in those terms. She thought about it now. She thought about a 12-year-old girl in Harlan County with a .22 rifle and a range instructor walking back from the target with an expression that said he had just seen something he did not have a category for, and the feeling of clarity that had defined every meaningful moment of her life since. She thought about what it would mean for that feeling, that specific, crystalline, size-irrelevant clarity to become something teachable, something transferable. Something that could live in other people who had also been pre-decided and pre-dissed and told in 100 different languages that they were the wrong shape for the room they were standing in. She said, "Then I hope they learn it." 3 days later, the formal ceremony was quiet by design. Whitfield had offered something larger. Maddox had told him quietly that Emily would not want something larger. He had turned out to be right, which was one more item in his developing ledger of understanding her correctly. It was the operations center, 8 people, the relevant commendation documents. A citation that Whitfield read aloud in the direct, unembellished way he did everything, and which contained sentences that she would not have written about herself, but which she could not dispute because they were accurate. When he finished reading, he stepped forward and pinned the commendation to her uniform. She stood at attention. The room was quiet. Then Maddox stepped forward. He was not required to do this. There was no protocol for what he did next. He stepped forward and he extended his hand, and he looked her in the eye and he said, in front of everyone in the room, "I owe you my team, I owe you my life, and I owe you an apology that is long overdue." His grip was firm and direct, and he held it for a full 3 seconds. "You were right about all of it. Every assessment, every warning, every call. and I was too committed to my own read of the situation to hear it. He released her hand. That is the last time I make that mistake. The room was completely still. Cruz, standing to the left, was looking at the wall. She could see his jaw working the particular jaw work of a person holding a strong emotion in place with pure muscular effort. Torres was not looking at the wall. Torres was looking directly at her with the open, unguarded expression of someone 24 years old watching something happen that is going to live in him for decades, becoming one of those moments that defines the shape of who he turns out to be. Briggs had been brought from the medical facility in a wheelchair. He was pale and taped and slightly medicated, and when Maddox finished, he started to clap. Just Briggs. One man clapping in a room of 8 people, doing it with the focused determination of someone who has made a decision and is not going to be embarrassed about it. Then Torres joined, then Kowalski, still on his crutch, then Cruz, then Reyes, then Whitfield. She stood at attention and she let it happen because it was genuine. And she understood the difference between genuine and performed, and this was genuine. And it deserved to be received as what it was. When it stopped, she said, "Thank you, all of you." She paused. And the next time a support element tells you the terrain is wrong, you listen. That's all I ask. Cruz laughed. Actually laughed the real version, not the tarmac version. The version that comes from recognition rather than diminishment. After the ceremony, she called Harlan County. Her grandfather answered on the second ring, which meant he had been near the phone, which meant someone had told him to be near the phone, which meant her mother had been talking to people. "Emmy," he said, just that. Her name in the voice that had been the first voice to tell her she was good at something. "Hey, Papa," she said. "I heard some things," he said. "You heard some things," she confirmed. A pause. She could hear him breathing the slight labor of 81-year-old lungs that had spent 30 years in a coal mine and had earned the right to work a little harder. "You okay?" "Cracked ribs," she said. "Hand?" She almost smiled. "The rifle." "Perfect." He made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a hum, but something that contained both, something that was his specific language for satisfaction and pride, and the particular joy of knowing exactly who someone is. He said, "I always told your mother. I said that girl sees things." "You did," she said. "She thought I meant birds," he said. "I meant everything." She pressed her lips together. She breathed. She said, "I'm going to take a new assignment." "Probably. I don't know exactly what it looks like yet. It'll be different from before." "Different how?" "Different in that people will know what I can do before they decide what I am," she said. A long pause. Then her grandfather said, "Well, it's about time." She laughed. For the first time since she had stepped off that transport aircraft at Fort Sentinel, for the first time since the tarmac and the laugh and the word that was meant to reduce her and instead became the first word of a different story, she laughed. Fully and without guard. "Yeah," she said, "it is." She stood outside the operations building with the Arizona sun pressing down on everything and the plain card in her chest pocket and her grandfather's voice still warm in her ear, and she thought about what came next. Not the assignment, not the rooms, not the reports and the assessments and the people who were going to want to understand how she had done what she did. She thought about the moment between the breath and the trigger, the moment of pure clarity where nothing external could reach her, where her size and her appearance and the world's accumulated opinions about both ceased to have any weight at all, where the only thing that existed was the space between her eye and the truth of what needed to be done. She had lived her whole life for those moments. She had climbed a 700-foot ridge in a sandstorm and descended it with cracked ribs and stitched hands, because those moments mattered more than the opinion of anyone who had never inhabited them. She had stood on a rock in the dark and made 9 decisions in 8 minutes and 40 seconds that the world's best shooters said they could not have made. And she had made them not because she was fearless, but because she was prepared, because she had spent 30 years converting every dismissal and every doubt and every word like doll into fuel for the work that only she could do. She was not the biggest person in the room. She had never been the biggest person in the room. She was something rarer and more permanent than that. She was the person the room called when the room ran out of other options. She was the person who saw the storm before the instruments did, read the ground before the intelligence did, and made the shot that 38 months of directed effort had failed to make alone. In the dark, without authorization, without certainty, with nothing but preparation, and the willingness to act on what she knew was true. The nickname doll stayed with her. She didn't ask them to stop using it. She let it stay because she understood something that Maddox had not understood on the tarmac, something that Cruz was beginning to understand now, something that Torres would carry with him into every room he walked into for the rest of his career. A name only has the power you let it have over you. And she had stopped giving that word power 7 years ago, the first time she finished a timed run faster than everyone else on the course. And a sergeant used it, and she decided quietly, without announcement, in the private territory of her own conviction, that the word was his problem. Not hers. She had never made it hers again. She put the phone away. She looked at the sky, clear now. The storm completely gone. The Arizona blue absolute and enormous, and entirely indifferent to what had happened beneath it. She picked up her rifle case. She walked, and the smallest sniper in the room had long since stopped being the smallest anything. She was simply the one who could see the way home, when everyone else was lost in the dark, and she had proven it where it mattered, at 3,000 meters, in a sandstorm, with nothing but the truth of what she had always been, and the courage to act on it when acting on it was the only thing standing between 7 lives and everything that wanted to end them. That was who Emily Carter was. That was who she'd always been. And now, finally, the world knew it too.